Looking at our world from a theological perspective. This is the Theology Central Podcast, making theology central.
Good morning, everyone. It is Saturday, November the 13th, 2021. It is currently 9:57 a.m. Central Time, and I'm coming to you live from the empty sanctuary of Victory Baptist Church, located right here in Ovalo, Texas. As always, thank you so much for listening. I know you have a million choices. So if you spend any time listening to me, it is an honor. It is a privilege. Thank you so very much. I appreciate, you will never know how much I appreciate your support, you listening, emailing, anything you do to support, sharing the program. I greatly appreciate it. So thank you so very much. As always, if you're listening to me live this morning using the Spreaker app, hit the little chat icon and you can add your thoughts, your questions, your perspective. We always appreciate that as well. And if you're not listening to me live, or even if you are listening to me live and you don't feel like posting something in the chat, all you have to do is email me, newsif@yahoo.com, newsif@yahoo.com. That's newsif@yahoo.com. I always try, I don't think I've ever missed an email, but I always try to respond as soon as possible. Sometimes it may be short, but I always try to respond. So feel free to email me anytime about anything. That's always appreciated as well, because it lets me know you're out there. When I turn on the microphone and speak, I don't know who hears me. And sometimes that's only revealed to me when that person contacts me and sends an email saying, "Hey, I've been listening to you," and that's when I know you're there. Other than that, you just show up as a number on a statistics page that says you had this many downloads today. You had this many, whatever the statistics demonstrators show at a particular time. And so that's great to see that number. But it's always better to then know, okay, that's the person who's actually listening to me from that particular area. And so it's always beneficial. So thank you so very much. Now, we have a lot to do, so I hope you're ready to listen, okay? Here we go. Let's start with this. One of the absolutely fundamental truths of Christianity. I mean, this is absolutely basic. It's fundamental, and it is critical because this belief, I think, changes everything about how a Christian thinks. Because of this truth, it should, let me state it this way, it should have a profound impact on how you think about everything. It's a fundamental truth. It is basic. It's like Christianity 101. I think sometimes Christians believe this maybe theologically, but they don't always seem to apply it to everything, but it's absolutely one of the most important truths, and it is found in the very first verse of the Bible, Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That is such a fundamental truth, because we believe that in the beginning wasn't matter. In the beginning wasn't some material that was going to explode and bring everything into existence. In the beginning, there was God, and the all-powerful God, and that this God created everything. So we don't believe in the beginning was matter. We believe in the beginning was God. We believe this God created everything. Because God created everything, then guess what? If we're going to find purpose and meaning in this creation, we have to look to the Creator, not to the creation. All of creation was created, so purpose and meaning can only be found in the Creator. So we look to the Creator, and not only can purpose and meaning be found in the Creator, this is very important, morality can only be found in the Creator. If we are created with purpose and meaning, and that Creator can determine what is right and what is wrong. And because we are created, right? All of creation comes from God as purpose and meaning, and we are creations of God, then that means that our purpose, our value, our identity is found in God. We're just not a cosmic accident. We were created by God. There's purpose, there's meaning, there's morality, truth. Everything is found in God. So our entire understanding of everything is found in God. So the way to understand everything is to grow in our understanding of God, which then makes theology central to everything. You see the reason I call the podcast Theology Central, because theology is central to everything. Our understanding of God is central to our understanding of everything else. If we want to understand anything, you have to understand everything about God. It's that simple. A lack of understanding about God leads to misunderstanding of everything else. But this is just such a fundamental truth. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That is that changes everything. And that truth is so critical. But we understand that in our culture, there is a lot of pushback to that fundamental truth. There is a denial. There is an attack upon that fundamental truth. And that usually comes from the world of science, where science calls this into question and says, no, not in the beginning. There wasn't any God. In the beginning was matter, and then matter exploded, and then we have everything else. And so everything is here. It's basically a mindless, meaningless, process that brought everything into existence. So there isn't no ultimate purpose. There is no ultimate there's no ultimate purpose. There's no ultimate meaning. There's no ultimate morality. Purpose, meaning, and morality is found within, us. We figure all of that out, which of course has profound societal implications. So this is such a absolutely fundamental truth. And because science is the one constantly challenging that, whenever I hear any discussion about basically theology and science, or the concept of God and science, I always obviously stop to listen. And that occurred this morning on my drive here. Now, if you are a member of the Theology Central Book Club, which is absolutely free to join, go to theologycentral.net, look at the menu that should be across the screen, or depending on the device you're using, it may be a drop-down menu. Just look for the menu and look for Theology Central Book Club. Follow the link. It's free to join. You never have to buy anything. And even if you do buy a book, none of the money comes to us. Basically, it's something that Amazon created. It's very simple and it's very easy. The reason you join it is anytime I'm looking at a book or I think a book is interesting, whether I agree or disagree with the book, it's if I think it's interesting, I simply add the book to the book club. You get notified, hey, Theology Central just added a new book to the book club, and then you can look at it. You don't even have to purchase it from Amazon. You can purchase it wherever you want, but it's just an easy way to just tell you when I'm looking at a book, if I'm reading a book. It's just a way to put books before you that I think will be interesting. Again, it doesn't mean that I always agree with them. It just thinks that, this is a book that they need to know about. This is a book that I think is very interesting. This is a book that a lot of people are talking about. And typically, at some point, then I'll turn on this microphone and talk about the book, and you would have already received the notification. Well, if you've been paying attention, if you're a member of the Theology Central Book Club, you received a notification about 5-6 minutes ago because I just added a new book, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about that book. The book is called Cosmic Chemistry. Cosmic Chemistry, Do God and Science Mix? Cosmic Chemistry, Do God and Science Mix by Professor John Lennox. Cosmic Chemistry, Do God and Science Mix? It looks like it was released on September the 17th, 2021. Again, Cosmic Chemistry, Do God and Science Mix by Professor John Lennox. Now, here's the description as found on Amazon. Is this rigorous pursuit of scientific knowledge really compatible with a sincere faith in God? Building on the arguments put forward in God's Undertaker, Has Science Buried God?, Professor John Lennox examines afresh the plausibility of a Christian theistic worldview in light of some of the latest developments in scientific understanding. Professor Lennox focuses on the areas of evolutionary theory, the origins of life and the universe, and the concepts of mind and consciousness to provide a detailed and compelling introduction to the science and religion debate. He also offers his own reasoning as to why he continues to be convinced by a Christian approach to explaining these things. Robust in its reasoning, but respectful in tone, this book is vital reading for anyone exploring the relationship between science and God. Now, let me just say this. In any book that's written from a Christian perspective about science and God, always make sure as you read, you can verify, do independent research to make sure if they make any claims, what are other people saying about those claims? Have there been a counterpoint put forth? You can always use the Christian book as a starting place, but you also want to see how other people outside of Christianity, how people in the atheistic, materialistic, evolutionary world, what they are saying about it as well, because you always want to be fair, you always want to be balanced, and you always want to be accurate. We don't ever want to misrepresent or say things, because I've seen sometimes an argument made by a Christian in regards to something scientific or something in regards to evolution, and it's either been completely debunked or it's completely just a myth, or, in other words, it's completely fraudulent. And whenever that happens, that makes us look extremely foolish. So always verify, verify, verify. But I heard about this book on my drive here, and as I heard the discussion, I was like, whoa, I want to tell everyone about this, because I think this book should provide at least much to think about, to study on your own, to research some questions for you to think about, and it may provide you a resource that could be very helpful and beneficial in giving to someone who is very much committed, not to the fundamental Christian truth that in the beginning God created everything, but they are committed to in the beginning was matter, matter exploded, everything is the product of basically a mindless process, a mindless, meaningless process, that there was no God, there was no mind, logic, meaning driving it. It just happened. It was meaningless. It's just random time and chance, and everything just came together at the right time in the right way to produce everything that we see. And so for those who really push that idea, defend that idea, cling to that idea, it's always good to have maybe resources that possibly you can just hand them without getting into a never-ending argument and debate, depending on your relationship with the person and depending if they're willing to actually read or explore something. But before you ever hand a book to someone, you always want to read it for yourself. That is so important. Let me say that again. If you are a Christian and there's someone out there that you are attempting to witness to or challenge their worldview, before you hand them a book, ensure that you have read it for yourself, because I have seen so many times someone will hand a book to someone, a Christian, and they haven't read it themselves, and either the book doesn't actually do what they think it's going to do, it doesn't provide the point of view that they think it, whatever there's just major problems in the book, and the Christian ends up looking very, very, very foolish. I've had this happen to me many times, where a Christian will hand me a book that supposedly argues against some position that they think I hold to. And in many cases, I'll come back and go, you do realize the book you just gave me actually supports my perspective, not yours. Oh, I didn't realize that. Well, why did you hand me the book? Why didn't you read it first? Okay, that you would think that would just be something people would do, but I've had it happen to me so many times where, nope, you need to read this book. Okay, I go back to him, I've read it. And what'd you think? I think you gave me a book that doesn't support what you are trying to argue. In fact, this book would dismantle your argument. Well, I didn't read it. Well, then why did you hand it to me? So I know I just repeated myself, but you get the idea. So I would just challenge you to look into this book and then read it for yourself, and then listen. If you do read it, I want to know what you think. What did you find good in the book? What did you dislike about the book? Did you find, good arguments, fraudulent arguments? Anything that you find, let me know. because I think I'm going to read it, obviously. But what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to let you hear a little bit of what I heard on my drive here, because as soon as I got here, I was like, let me look this up. Oh, there it is. And once I found it, well, guess what? I grabbed the audio and we're going to listen to some of this. Now, we're not going to be able to listen to all of this. And the reason why is I'm almost positive they have in the middle of this, these little commercial breaks, which make it, in other words, I haven't even had a chance to edit anything out. So I'm probably just going to go to their first break. We'll probably listen. I'll reduce the volume through their first break to see if it's all kinds of commercials. If it's not, we may continue through. We'll just see. I don't know how far we're going to go, but we'll just see so that you can hear an interview with the author himself, with Professor John C. Lennox. You can hear for yourself him talk about the book. And again, when you read it carefully, verify before we hand this to anyone else. Now, I know what you're thinking. Well, you didn't read it first and you're telling us about it. I'm telling you about it. I'm not handing you this book to say, this is going to prove you wrong. This is going to change your view. I'm just telling you that the book is out there and you should consider it. But before you hand it to someone to try to, in a sense, witness to them or change their minds, we have to verify what is in it. All right. So a little bit different in that aspect. All right. So are you ready? Hopefully you'll find this to be interesting and to be beneficial. I thought the interview was very, very good. Brought up a lot of interesting points. Some things they brought up I definitely want to do a little more research in, but I thought it was very interesting. Now, I was probably at the end of the interview. I did not hear the beginning of the interview. So I don't know what is said at the beginning of the interview, but we'll just listen to it together. So that's what we always do here, right? I love to listen to things together. That's where it doesn't come across as rehearsed. I like it to be very real and organic. So here we go. Oh, you probably need to know the name of the program. On my way here, I was listening to Cross-Examined. That's Cross-Examined. In fact, you can go to their website, crossexamined.org, crossexamined.org. Cross, obviously, CROSS, examined, EXAMINED, crossexamined.org. I don't agree with everything on the program at times. Again, there's so many times when I'll talk about a program, I'll get an email or something from someone, well, I disagree with this. I don't agree with every program. I'm just always listening to what's going on in the world of Christianity, and I share with you, and I will share what I agree with, and I will share what I disagree with. We can't always expect to agree with everything. I'm sure that some of you listen to me and don't agree with everything. So, which, just proves how wrong you are, because according to Harvard, I'm 99.9% right. Okay, I'm joking. All right. But crossexamine.org, that's what we're getting ready to listen to. It broadcasted this morning on American Family Radio, which, of course, don't get me started how many frustrations I have with American Family Radio, but it's at one of the stations in the local area. And so I was going through stations on my way here, and I'm like, oh, that sounds like an interesting interview. Stop, listen, get information, and share it with my listeners. So that's what I'm doing, all right? So, again, the name of the book, Cosmic Christianity, Cosmic Chemistry by John Lennox. Right? So let's listen, check out the book, join the Theology Central Book Club. There's so much that I want you to do, but right now, just listen. Here we go.
Ladies and gentlemen, what is the biggest myth that the general public believes concerning the relationship between God and science? Can a scientist believe in God? Can science explain everything? Is science an unstoppable force in human development? Is it going to provide for all our needs? Or have there been new developments in recent years that is now causing some people to say, all this really points back to some sort of intelligence? Well, there is no better man on the planet to deal with these issues than my guest today, one of my favorite guests of all time. We've had this man on the program several times because he's written some outstanding books. including God's Undertaker, Has Science Buried God?, Gunning for God, 7 Days to Divide the World, Determined to Believe, 2084, Against the Flow, book after book, especially in recent years, very timely books. And the guest comes all the way from Oxford, England. He is the great Dr. John Lennox, and he's going to be with us for the entire program. He's written a brand new book called Cosmic Chemistry, which I've been going through for the past several days. You're going to enjoy it. And as always, Dr. Lennox really can explain complex issues to everyday people like myself. That's why I appreciate him so much. So, Dr. Lennox, great having you on. How are you today?
I'm very well, and I'm absolutely delighted to see that you're well and going at full power. It's always a pleasure to have a conversation with someone like you.
Well, John, it's great having you on, and I know our listeners really appreciate the way you can take these complex issues and make them understandable. And this brand new book is actually an expansion and a revision of a book you wrote about 14 years ago called God's Undertaker, Has Science Buried God? The new book is now called Cosmic Chemistry. So my question, John, is why did you write Cosmic Chemistry? What's new in the book? What's changed in the past 14 years?
Well, I've been constantly thinking about these things over the past 14 years, and I'd already begun to revise some of my more recent books, like God and Stephen Hawking. And so I thought I ought to bring God's Undertaker up to date, but it very soon became apparent that it needed to be rewritten. There's been such a lot of development in the science-religion debate, especially where biology is concerned. And there have been so many new discoveries that have overturned some of the ideas that are associated with neo-Darwinism, so that you've got to the state where some very leading scientists, they're not necessarily Christians, of course, or believers in God, but on the basis of the sheer science, let me quote one of the most famous, and that is Dennis Noble, Fellow of the Royal Society at Oxford, who was very kind in endorsing my book. And he just says neo-Darwinism doesn't need to be revised, it needs to be replaced. And I think it's important that people know that many of us have been for years skeptical about the capacity of natural selection and mutation and one or two other things to be creative. It clearly does something. It accounts for levels of variation and so on. But now what we're finding is biologists themselves are showing us that the complexity of the living cell, say, vast as we knew it was, is even vaster, and it's of a nature that really pushes me certainly very much further in my conviction that there's intelligent God behind it. And so
Now, a couple of things. One of the things that's so irritating about the scientific religion debate, right? Here's materialism, Darwinianism, here on that side, and there's intelligent design, creationism, Christianity on the other. What drives me crazy is that so many times it's like it's explained, at least from the materialistic Darwinian side, it especially, and usually these are not, maybe even sometimes from teachers, especially in a public school system or maybe at a university. Sometimes they teach the materialism, Darwinianism, as if this is absolute fact, and to deny this makes you an idiot and makes you uneducated and makes you a fool. And I drives me crazy because it's like, no, Darwinianism, materialism, that entire understanding, field of understanding, that entire perspective is constantly, can we say it, evolving and changing. And constantly people within the experts within that field are like, well, this doesn't really work. This doesn't really work. And sometimes that honesty about it constantly changing and not working and people finding problems with it, that's not always readily admitted by people in it. Sometimes a high school science teacher who seems to have an axe to grind against Christianity just tries to act like, look, if you don't believe this, you're just, superstitious fool, who probably believes the earth is flat and almost treats you like you're dumb. And I cannot stand that, because it's like, no, the issue should be, and this, and I say this for both sides, the Christian and those who are we'll call it a Christian versus those who hold to materialism. Theism versus materialism, Christianity versus Darwinianism. I would say this to both sides. What should always matter, I don't care which side you're on, is the pursuit of truth and being accurate in what we know and what we don't know. I don't care if it goes against your particular ideology, your perspective, your theology. I don't care. We should always pursue truth. And sometimes it seems and this happens in so many issues, that it stops being about pursuing truth and it becomes about winning a debate, winning an argument. And we shouldn't be worried about trying to win arguments. We should be trying to discover truth and being honest with issues. And this is true for Christians as well, because many Christians, when they talk about materialism, Darwinianism, evolution, and they talk about that, many times Christians will use arguments that are just absolutely fraudulent and are wrong, and they will give misinformation. That's not acceptable either. I can't stand it when those on the materialistic side will not acknowledge some of the weaknesses and difficulties with their theories and with their ideas, or not even acknowledge that it's a theory. They will, in many cases, make an argument that something is a dogmatic truth. And I'm like, well, if it's such a dogmatic truth, why are there other scientists who are calling it, well, they're not real scientists. Okay, so any scientist who doesn't go along with your view is not a scientist. Okay, well, that's got to make it easy for you to always feel like you're right, because you become the Pope of science and you're the only one who's right. And anyone else who have scientific credentials who goes against your perspective, their scientific credentials are called into question. That's just as religious in nature. It's dogma, it's religion, it's based off faith as those within the Christian world. And then those within the Christian world, in many cases, they don't care to actually pursue truth and understanding. They're just like, give me 3 reasons why evolution is wrong. I don't care if these arguments are right. I don't care if they've been debunked. I don't care. I'm just going to throw them out there because I'm more interested in winning a debate. We have to pursue truth. We have to desire truth. And I know what I'm about to say is going to offend many Christians, but I don't care. It needs to be said. When it comes to education and the science disciplines, we should be as knowledgeable and as educated about evolution, materialism, as we can be. Some Christians take this approach. No. We should not learn anything about materialism, anything about evolution. We should not learn anything about that. We should just learn in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Yes, as Christians, we need to be taught that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. We need to be taught that because it's a fundamental truth. But we also want to know what the world is learning, what their perspectives are. We want to understand it, because the greater our understanding is of that perspective, the better equipped we are to address it in a meaningful way and maybe actually have the ability to be salt and light. It's hard to be salt and light when you are speaking from a position of complete ignorance. That does not help. So I've said this. If you homeschool your children should be more knowledgeable about materialism and evolution than their public school counterparts. They should be able to go to any university and walk into any science program, and they know the latest understandings of materialism, and they know that. Now, theologically, you hope that they accept and acknowledge that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, but like, this is what the world understands, and I'm going to understand it better so that I can speak to it from a position of knowledge. The only thing I can liken this to is this. As a Christian, I grew extremely frustrated. I grew extremely irritated by listening to many Protestants say things in regards to Catholicism, say things going on within the Catholic Church, and they would say things, and it clearly became evident to me they had no idea what they were talking about. They spoke from a position of ignorance. They never actually studied Catholic theology. They didn't understand Catholicism. They grabbed some little talking points and then tried to act like that they were an expert on Catholicism. So what I decided to do, you know what, if I'm ever going to speak on Catholicism, I'm going to try to learn as much about it as possible. So I enrolled in a Catholic university to learn Catholic theology, not because I was Catholic, but because I wanted to make sure I truly understood Catholic theology so that when I spoke of it and spoke about it or spoke to it, I could do so from a position of knowledge, not a position of ignorance. Now, that was a very enlightening time of study. It was very beneficial. And one of the reasons I wanted to do so is anytime you study church history, guess what you're going to bump into over and over and over? Catholicism. So I wanted to try to understand different things. Now, by no means did I ever become an expert on Catholic theology, because you could spend a life trying to pursue that area of study. And I have all kinds of other areas of study that I wanted to pursue as well. But I wanted to do as much as I could so that whenever I preached on it, I could go, oh, okay, no, this is the correct way to understand it. And it was very enlightening, because it demonstrated that many Catholic theological concepts are very present within the Protestant world. We just kind of give them a different name, but in many cases we're saying something very similar. I won't go down that entire path of discussion, but you've heard me mention that many times. So I think that that's the best I can liken it to. Is I didn't learn Catholicism because I was a Catholic. I learned it so that I could understand it and speak to it. You don't want your kids to understand everything about evolution because you want them to believe in evolution, but you want them to understand everything about it because it is the dominant materialism, Darwinian evolution, all the different concepts contained within that world. That's the dominant scientific philosophy and belief in the culture today. Well, if they're going to ever advance or try to pursue anything within the scientific disciplines, they're going to have to know it. They're going to be able to speak to it intelligently. They're going to have to be able to write papers and about it. It shouldn't always be, oh, no. Just don't listen to it, disagree with it. Disagree with it, but first learn it. Then you can dismantle it and take it apart in the appropriate time and place. I never forget. We were sitting on the front steps. Of First Baptist Church, Tuscola, Texas, which is about 3 miles down the road from where I'm sitting. It's the church where God saved me. All right. So we're sitting there, and one of the teenagers, I guess it was in science class, and he had to write a paper. I can't remember, dealing something with evolution or something. And so he decided he was going to write his paper basically not to fulfill the assignment, but to basically write a paper trying to provide an apologetic against Darwinian evolution, right? And so, in other words, the paper was was given a specific task, a specific thesis you were to explore, you were to explain, you were to defend, whatever the case may be. And he wanted to turn it into an opportunity, in a sense, to witness to the science teacher, change the science teacher, challenge the science teacher, but that wasn't the point of the paper. Well, he ended up getting an F. And I remember him sitting on the steps of the church. And I think the pastor was there, me, maybe some other teenagers. And someone wanted to view it as like he was being persecuted for his Christian faith. And my argument was, you got an F because you didn't do the assignment. You got an F because you weren't to write an apologetic for Christian creationism. You were to write a paper on that particular subject. So why didn't you write a paper on that particular subject? And then, if there are differences of opinion within the scientific world, pull those out. So everyone looked at me like, I was an atheist and a liberal. And I'm like, I just don't understand. Why wouldn't we just write the paper according to the assignment? That's what you're called to do. It's not about necessarily what you agree or disagree with. Your job is to write a paper explaining this. Now, and if there are scientific problems within that theory, you can point out those scientific theories if you are using correct information. So I just think sometimes Christians take this approach that, We don't need to learn it. I'm going to keep my kids from it. And I just think that hurts us. We want to understand it. We want to know it. And then we want to be honest about it. But on the same time, the materialistic evolutionary side, they tend to go, look, many, not all, but many just, it's like, oh, there's problems within your theory. There's those questioning your theory, and they're like, la, 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 la. No. It's almost like both sides do the same thing. It's like, I don't want to hear anything other than what I believe. I don't want to hear anything other than what I believe. I only want to know what I already believe. And it's like, no, that's not the way it should work, because that destroys the pursuit of truth. So I know I went a long time on that, but there's a lot of issues there that bothers me on both sides. It really does on both sides. And so pursue truth. All right, let's get back to this.
I wanted to bring that to the attention of my Christian friends, but also of the general public, so that at least they have the information on which they can make their decisions.
Dr. Lennox, you mentioned this Royal Society that Dr. Noble is a part of there in Oxford. And I recall there was a meeting about 5 years ago there, November of 2016, calling into question the neo-Darwinian viewpoint of or the prominent neo-Darwinian viewpoint that natural selection and mutation could bring forth new life forms. These people, these members of the Royal Society, that scientific affiliation over there in the UK, are not necessarily Christians. These are just people saying, look, the neo-Darwinian viewpoint of the world doesn't seem to work anymore. We need to come up with a new naturalistic theory. What naturalistic theories are they putting forth now to say that this is how life got here, or this is how subsequent life forms got here?
Well, I'm not so sure that they're actually got as far as putting forward a new naturalistic theory. What they're doing is, many of them are convinced naturalists, and they feel that in the end there's going to be a natural solution. That is, we don't have to invoke God at any level. But the interesting change is that for a long time it has been assumed that life developed bottom up. In other words, you can explain the complex things in terms of the simple things. They've now realized that this is not true from a scientific perspective. Top-down causation is very real, and the cell can modify itself. And what they're talking about, as I understand it, and I must emphasize to our hearers that I'm not a professional biologist, although I read an awful lot of it and I'm fascinated by it. But the exciting thing to my mind is that they're saying that the cell itself exhibits top-down causation. Now, for someone like me, I believe that there's an ultimate top, that reflects the fact that we've got to incorporate somehow the influence of a mind in it all. Let me give you a simple illustration. If we see the word exit above a door, and we see the sign EXIT, now we know that there are materials involved and automatic processes may have created it, but the fact that this is a word that carries meaning, it's actually a Latin word for going out, means that we know that there's a human mind involved in it. And we know that because of the linguistic nature of EXIT. It carries meaning. And when we look inside the living cell, not only do we see DNA, which is an information-bearing macromolecule, we now see various levels of language-like information uncovered at the epigenetic level, above the genome, and so on. And this is not a mathematical proof, of course it isn't, but it's a huge pointer that perhaps what we need to do scientifically is open our minds to the possibility that the whole thing, it depends on top-down causation by the mind of God itself.
Well, that's what you cover in the book Cosmic Chemistry, ladies and gentlemen. I'm talking to Dr. John Lennox, all the way from Oxford, England. The brand new book is called Cosmic Chemistry, and it covers the waterfront on so many issues. In this book, Dr. Lennox is covering what is science, how do we define science? What are the assumptions made by scientists? Why were the early Christian scientists, or I should say why did science come out of the Christian worldview in the 1600s and the 1700s? He covers all that. He covers the Galileo issue. He covers several other issues in that regard. And then he gets into fine-tuning of the universe. He gets into biology. He talks about why information is so important and how do you explain information. Even talks a little bit about theistic evolution and these kinds of ideas. We're going to get into all that as this program unfolds. Again, my guest is Dr. John Lennox. The book is called Cosmic Chemistry, and it is a tour de force. You're going to want to get it. So check it all out. Go to Amazon or anywhere you get books and look up Cosmic Chemistry by Dr. John Lennox. And when we come back from the break, I'm going to ask Dr. Lennox this question. What is the biggest myth that the general public believes concerning the relationship between God and science? And then we're going to take our conversation from there, talk about the God of the Gaps Fallacy, several other important concepts related to this. So don't go anywhere. You're listening to I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist with Frank Turek on the American Family Radio Network. Back in 2. Welcome back to I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist with Frank Turek on the American Family Radio Network. My guest today is the great Dr. John Lennox, all the way from Oxford, England.
Okay, they edited out the 2-minute break, so that's great for me. That's awesome. They did it for me, okay? So I'm glad, because when they have those 2-minute breaks, then I got to either try to reduce the volume for 2 minutes because I don't want to be playing commercials or anything that, I don't want to do that. So this gives us the ability to at least continue this on. So we'll probably take this to the top, or do I want to say the top of the hour. We'll go to the hour mark. We're at the 41-minute, 24-second mark right now, according to the timer on my software. So we'll take this at least to the hour mark. And hopefully then you can go find this. Now, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, as I think is another name for the podcast. It's also called Cross-Examined. I've never quite understood why there seems to be 2 names for this podcast. But if you need help finding the podcast, you can, I don't always agree with everything they talk about. I don't always agree with their perspectives. But again, it's just another, one of the thousands of podcasts I subscribe to. In this particular case, I just heard, before I heard it in a podcast form, I heard it on the radio, and now we get to hear a little bit about this book, Cosmic Chemistry, because I think it's well worth your time, and hopefully you're already finding yourself a little bit interested in wanting to read the book. But let's see what else they have to say here, because I think there's a lot of important concepts that was discussed in this program.
John has been a professor over there for many years. He's debated Richard Dawkins a number of times, which you can all see on YouTube. Check that out. Just look for the Dawkins-Lennox debates. You should be able to find them. And he's debated several others as well. I know Dr. Lennox, you debated, I think, Peter Atkins, Christopher Hitchens, several other debates. You just got to go to YouTube, and Dr. Lennox is just so affable and winsome and also brilliant in many of the analogies he brings to the table when he debates these folks that you're going to really enjoy and learn a lot from him. But Dr. Lennox, I wanted to jump right back into our discussion about your book, Cosmic Chemistry, which is an expansion and revision of the original book called God's Undertaker. A lot of new information in there because a lot has happened in 14 years. But let me ask you this, Dr. Lennox. What do you think the biggest myth is that the general public believes concerning the relationship between God and science?
I think probably the biggest myth in that direction is that science can explain everything, and therefore we don't need God. And it's only a small step from there to saying that God doesn't exist. And it's a myth because it isn't even true. And it's very important for the general public to realize that the notion that science can explain everything is palpably false. Because if that very statement, science can explain everything, is not a statement of science, it's a statement about science. So science itself cannot explain that statement. But more easy to follow is the fact that some of the greatest scientists have seen that very clearly. Albert Einstein once said, You can talk about the moral basis of science, but you can't talk about the scientific basis of morality. And Sir Peter Medawar, who was a Nobel Prize-winning scientist in Oxford, once said it's so easy to see that science is limited because it cannot even answer the questions of a child. Where do I come from? Where am I going? What is the meaning of life? We need to turn to literature and theology and philosophy for answers to those questions. Now, I'm passionate about science, make no mistake about that. But Medawar added, he said, you're doing science a disservice if you claim that it's going to be able to answer every question. And the myth that goes along with that, Frank, is that science and rationality are coextensive. If it's not natural science, then it's not rational. Well, that's sheer nonsense. If that were true, half the faculties in your distinguished universities would have to close tomorrow. There'd be no history, no philosophy, no languages, no literature, and all of that. These are rational disciplines, but they are not natural science. And of course, I'm very careful to use the word science in the Anglo-Saxon way, that is, as the natural sciences. The Germans have a word Wissenschaft, to create knowledge, which covers both the humanities and the natural sciences. But it's the natural sciences we're talking about. And that I call it scientific fundamentalism, that science is the only way to truth.
I think this is very important to realize. I think in many educational settings, really, it's the idea that science, you got to hear what I'm about to say, science basically is God. Science explains everything. Science is the answer to everything. And if you go against science, you go against God. Therefore, you are a heretic. Therefore, you have committed blasphemy because you've shown disrespect and you're not showing fear to God, which is science. Where Christianity would say, no, in the beginning there is God, not in the beginning there is science. In the beginning there is God, and reason flows from God. The fact that we can reason requires an ultimate mind, which is God. The fact that there are laws of nature, the fact that the fact that the universe can be understood, the fact that there is DNA, all of these things seem to require that the only way we can understand it is because they are understandable. And the only reason that they can be attained through reason is because there was an ultimate reason that created them. So from a Christian perspective, theology is the discipline, the most important discipline, because all of our understanding flows from an understanding of God. We start with the fact that there is a God. There's a theological study, the study of God. Once we understand God, then that understanding from God leads us to pursue understanding in everything else. Because if the world, think about it this way, if the world was created, or if the world, or not even created, if the world just happened through a meaningless, mindless process, then why can we then have the ability to now understand it and grasp it? Because there would be no purpose or meaning behind it. So how can we use reason? Where did reason originate in a meaningless, mindless origin of everything? If everything just started from a materialistic perspective, there was nothing controlling it, nothing organizing it, nothing developing it, then how can reason attain understanding of it? Because it would have to be somewhat reasonable. So in other words, the fact that the universe can be understood through reason, then there has to be a source for reason, and materialism doesn't give us the origin of reason. And I believe the only thing that can explain the origin of reason is a God who has reason, has a mind, who does things. There's an ultimate mind and there's an ultimate reason, which is God. So I first understand God, then what flows from an understanding of God is then reason, because there's a purpose for reason. There's an origin of reason, God. There's an ultimate truth, God. And then that allows me to pursue and examine everything going on in society because it's understandable, because it wasn't created by a mindless process. It was created by God. So I think that God is required for the universe even to be understandable in the first place, if that makes any sense. If I'm being understandable, I hope that makes sense. It just doesn't. It's like in the beginning was either God or in the beginning was science, and much of the educational system starts with in the beginning was science. And we start with in the beginning of God, and because there was a God, now we can do science and seek to understand things because things are understandable and they can be understood through reason, and there's laws of nature, et cetera, and those exist because there is a God. Science can't explain the origin of the laws of nature, of reason, of even why the universe can be understood through reason, because science can't explain any of that because, well, in the beginning was matter and it blew up. So why can I even trust my reason then? If reason originated in a mindless, meaningless process, then why can I trust reason? If my brain originated through a mindless, meaningless process, then why could I trust anything that my mind thinks? Now, these are some concepts that are mentioned here in this interview. I don't know if we'll get to them, but I just want you to think about some of that really science has become God, and God has been replaced by this. It's really, to me, the argument between science and religion is really an argument between two different gods. The God of the Bible or the God of science. It's two systems of theology. Now, I know that they would say, no, it's not theological, it's materialistic, but it's your materialism becomes your God. It becomes the faith in which you must adhere to, and if you don't, you are a heretic. So it's really a competing between two gods, and I think only one explains reason and understanding because, well, it starts with an ultimate reason, God. All right, let's continue.
To open up the sheer fact that most of the truths that most of us believe were not given to us by science anyway. And secondly, and this is part of the myth, I suppose, that a God explanation is excluded by a scientific explanation. And the simplest example for that is water boiling. Why is the water boiling? Well, the heat is agitating the molecules of water and the water is boiling. Well, I could equally well say it's boiling because I would like a cup of tea. Mm-hmm. And those two explanations of boiling water are not in conflict. They certainly don't contradict each other. They complement each other, but they're different kinds of explanation. And what I love to try to get across in my book is simply this. The God explanation doesn't compete with a science explanation any more than, let's put it this way, the Henry Ford explanation for a motor car competes with automobile engineering and physics. They're complementary. And when I put this to school children, they'll say, but sir, you need both. And that's exactly it. We need both for a full explanation. So there are a lot of myths surrounding the nature of explanation. And that's why many people don't even get started in thinking about God, because they exclude him for all the wrong reasons.
You also spent a lot of time, Dr. Lennox. Again, the book is called Cosmic Chemistry. I was going to ask you about the Henry Ford illustration. You've already covered that. But you also talk about the fact that there's another myth, or I don't know if it's a myth, but people have committed the God of the Gaps Fallacy. And some people then think that any explanation that says intelligence is behind it is the God of the Gaps Fallacy. First of all, you got a whole chapter on this, but can you sum up what is the God of the Gaps Fallacy, and why are you and other theists not committing the God of the Gaps Fallacy when we say either God created the universe or fine-tuned the universe or started life or anything like that?
Well, putting it crudely, the God of the Gaps Fallacy is I can't explain it, therefore God did it. And then when science fills up that gap, then there's less space for God. That's basically it. So in the ancient world, they couldn't understand lightning or thunder, and so they said the gods did it. So a short class in atmospheric physics, and that God has disappeared. And many people feel, even Stephen Hawking, the late Stephen Hawking, he thinks that the God of the Bible is that kind of a God of the gaps. Now, I want to refute that very, very strongly indeed, because so many people today, when they hear the word God, they're thinking about these ancient gods of the gaps. Let me illustrate it two ways. One with Newton, when he discovered his law of gravitation, he didn't say, oh, wonderful, I now know how it works, I don't need God. No, what he did was write the most famous book in the history of science, the Principia Mathematica, and expressed in it the hope that it would lead thinking people to believe in a deity. In other words, the more he understood about the workings of the universe, the more he was convinced there was God behind it, not less. God wasn't filling a gap. God was the explanation of why there were scientific explanations. But let's now take an example I've already used on this program, the word exit above a door. Now, that appeals to many of us that it indicates a human intelligence was involved. But if I say to you, look, come on, that's you're jacking out of this, because that exit, you postulate a mind, that's a mind of the gaps. Now, nobody would accept that. And if I say to them, why do you think a mind is involved? They'll say, because of the language involved. It involves language. And therefore, when I say at the deeper level to my colleagues who are doing research on the human genome or DNA, I say, look, you see exit, that's only got 4 letters, and you postulate an intelligence for it. And now we have the human genome that carries meaning for the proteins, 3.4 billion letters, and you say chance and necessity, the laws of nature and natural processes. You've got a problem. Because the obvious inference is that there is intelligence involved. You see, there are good gaps and bad gaps, and I talk about these in my book. A bad gap is one that science will close, and it needs to be closed, like the thunder and lightning example. But a good gap is that if we're looking at a language-like structure in the living cell, to try to close that by saying it's a result of a natural process, that isn't an explanation at all, because we know of no natural processes that create language. So the explanation in terms of intelligence is, let me put it this way, an explanation that makes sense. And I much prefer that to one that doesn't make any sense.
Yes, and that's what is covered in the book, Cosmic Chemistry. Again, my guest is Dr. John Lennox, all the way from Oxford, England. John, a lot of people want to boil everything down. They want to reduce everything down, the reductionist view that everything is physics and chemistry. Let's go below that for just a second. Ask the question to an atheist. What would an atheist say? I know you've had many dialogues with atheists. I've had a few myself. What would an atheist say to the question, what is the origin of the laws of physics? What is the origin of the laws of mathematics? What is the origin of the laws of chemistry? You're saying they've created everything. Where did they come from? And why are they so fine-tuned and consistent? How do they answer that?
Well, I'd love to hear a sensible answer for them. They just simply don't know. And many of them have got the honesty to admit it. And that's a very good question to ask people, because a lot of this scientific work assumes many things. It assumes the rational intelligibility of the universe and the existence of the laws of nature. And nobody can tell you where the laws of nature come from unless they're prepared to say they come from an intelligent creator who designed the universe, the cosmos, with certain regularities inbuilt into them. That makes perfect sense. Mm-hmm. But to say they're just there as brute facts is very antithetical to the scientific spirit that wants explanation. The thing is that Some scientists are intent on limiting explanation to the natural and the materialistic. Now, of course, it's important to know what material and natural processes are involved. That is a very important part of science. In fact, it's a very large part of science. But in these particular areas where we've got language involved, language encoded, then we need to open our minds. And just as I say in my book that this universe appears to be word-based, and that reflects, of course, the statement in John's Gospel, in the beginning was the Word. But I use it to point out two things. One, word-based in the sense that we can describe it, at least in part, in mathematical terms, and word-based biologically, in the sense that one of the biggest growth areas in biology is molecular biology, studying the longest word that we've ever found. And if that doesn't point to a logos, a word behind the universe, I don't know what does.
The word is 3.5 billion letters long, right?
Yeah, well, that's right.
Yes. And if the word exit, as you've been saying, John, requires an intelligence, then a word 3.5 billion letters long should require it as well. And notice that Dr. Lennox is not arguing from what he doesn't know. He's not arguing from a gap in his knowledge. He's arguing from what he does know, that messages come from minds. And if the word exit requires a mind, then a word that's 3.5 billion letters long would require a mind as well. We've got a lot more with Dr. John Lennox right after the break. I'm Frank Turkey.
All right, I keep saying the top of the hour. We're at the hour mark on my screen. I want to continue. You really need to hear the next part. I'll just try to summarize a couple of things here. The issue is, in the beginning, from a Christian perspective, in the beginning, God. And because God exists and God has reason, he thinks, all of these things, that he is God, an intelligent being, creates everything. Therefore, the universe he creates will demonstrate that evidence of intelligence. Therefore, the universe will demonstrate laws of nature, laws of physics, whatever the case may be. They can be discovered because there was a reason, there was a mind that created everything. Therefore, the universe is reasonable in a sense that we can understand it and we can try to discover things about it. The only reason that can happen is there has to be a reason behind it. If the universe begins in a mindless, meaningless process where just something explodes, we don't really know why any of it happened, and it's just time and chance, then you would think, well, why would there be how can laws originate through a mindless, meaningless process? And then this comes to because then our ability to understand this comes from our minds. It comes from our brains. But then our minds and our brains is nothing more than the result of a mindless, meaningless process. So I want you to think about this. A mindless, meaningless process created everything, or is the source of everything. It's how everything originated, including my brain. All right, so now I have to trust my brain, which is the result of a mindless, meaningless process. Why would I trust my brain if it's the result of a mindless, meaningless process? It would be like, here's this computer. This computer was designed by a mindless, meaningless process. Now use this computer to do, whatever. Well, why would you trust the computer? Why? We trust the computer because there was intelligence behind the design of the computer. There's intelligence that put the computer together. We trust the intelligence, therefore we trust the working of the computer. It's with anything. I get into a car because I know that minds, designed it to work. Well, why would we trust anything that our minds would produce if it was produced by a meaningless, mindless process? He's going to get into that in the next segment. We can't get into it now because I'm already at an hour. You should go find Cross-Examined or I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, and you can fast forward to about the 22-minute mark, and you can listen to it for yourself. We may come back at a different time and listen to that section and just talk about it alone, but I want you to possibly purchase the book. Cosmic Chemistry It's available wherever you get your books. If you're a part of the Theology Central Book Club, you got a notification that I just added it. Please think about getting it, reading it. As always, check every claim that is made in the book. If they quote what supposedly scientists say, see if you can find the source of the quote. See if it's well documented. Verify, 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 as always. But I think it's a book that raises some very important questions. The fundamental truth of Christianity. Everything begins with this. In the beginning, God. In the beginning, there is a God. God was there in the beginning. It's not in the beginning matter. It's not in the beginning materialism. It's not in the beginning was science. In the beginning was God, and that God created everything. So all purpose, all meaning, morality, and everything is found in him. If there is no God, then everything can trace its origin back to a mindless, meaningless materialism. That therefore, how can I find purpose and meaning in a mindless, meaningless materialism? There is no purpose, there is no meaning, there is no morality. From that, it's just us. And then if it's just us, everything that we put forth comes from our brains, which is the result of a mindless, meaningless materialism. So why would I trust my brain? So in some ways, a mindless, meaningless materialism should lead you not to trust anything, and literally should lead you to an inability to even define what is real. Because, there's so many issues with it. And I know some of that gets more to a philosophical argument than a scientific argument. I know some of that may become more of a theological argument than a scientific argument. But those scientific theories of materialism, Darwinianism, they not only do they make a scientific look. Think about it this way: any theory about origin, whether in the beginning God or in the beginning matter, they may not only speak of the origin of the universe. Flowing from that comes all kinds of questions and ideas that would relate to theology, to philosophy, to ethics, to purpose and meaning, to all kinds of other areas, because that's the origin of everything. And if that's the origin of everything, well, then all of these other things are connected to that origin story, right? Whatever that origin was, all of those other disciplines have some connection to it, because those everything originates from something. Well, my thinking, I believe, originates because of a God who exists. There's a mind there. There's reason there. There is thinking there. There is purpose there. There is will there. There is morality there. So all of those aspects of thinking, reason, morality, purpose, all of those things that are so much a part of the human existence finds a far better origin in God than it does in the beginning, was just matter floating around nowhere and then blew up one day. And I know I'm very, 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 very much oversimplifying the scientific explanation, but the reason I oversimplify it is because no matter how complicated you make it sound, when you boil it down to its very bare essence, in the beginning was matter and it blew up. Or in the beginning there was a God, reason, thinking, mind, purpose, will, ethics, morality. All right, well, that so much reflects me. I'm a mind, I'm reason. I care about purpose. I care about meaning. I care about no matter, even people who are atheistic are very moral people because they will condemn certain ways of thinking, certain actions. Everyone has this sense of right and wrong built into us. All of that doesn't reflect a meaningless, mindless materialism. It reflects a creator. And that creator is mentioned in the first verse of the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And therefore, everything reflects that God in some way, shape, or form, in the sense that, well, he's the origin of everything. And everything only makes sense when we get back to the creator. You throw out the creator, nothing makes sense. You get back to the creator, everything makes sense. And I think we live in a world where it no longer makes any sense, because science has become the God to replace the true God. And it's not an argument between science and religion. It's an argument between two theologies. It's an argument between two gods. Which God are you going to go with? The God of materialism, meaningless, mindlessness, or in the beginning, God? Purpose, mind, will, thinking, morality. And nothing else makes any sense. Everything becomes meaningless without God. Even the pursuit of knowledge, because the pursuit of knowledge would mean that there is knowledge that can be understood. Well, where did that originate from? Can materialism even make it reasonable or understandable? And again, we have to rely on a brain. Where did the brain originate from? If it's just the result of meaningless, mindless process, I don't know why I would trust it in the first place. Now, I know those are very big questions. Many will immediately reject even the asking of the questions, but the questions should be asked, and that pursuit of inquiry should be sought. We should pursue it. We should go after. We should follow that area of thinking, because I think it's very important. I wish you could hear the rest of the discussion. I probably could have just played it for you, but I thought I would kind of summarize it there. I think they raised some very important questions, and those questions are addressed again in the book, Cosmic Chemistry. John C. Lennox. Find the book if you're a part of the Theology Central Book Club. If you purchase the book, I definitely want to know if you hate the book, if you think the book is foolish, let me know. But I think it's a very important concept. All right, I'll stop right there. Everyone have a great day. I'll be back on the air here shortly. You can email me, newsif@yahoo.com, newsif@yahoo.com. God bless.